Happy to be joined today by my good buddy and does great work in the business of NIL, Peter Schoenthal, CEO of Athliance. Pete, what's up, buddy? How are you?
Man, thanks for having me back on. It's been a while since we talked. Feels like a lot shorter, but NIL makes things go longer. So things are going great. We're busy, but we are in the wacky world of NIL. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's been a couple months since we've had you on, a little bit longer than that. Not like we don't talk every day or every other day about this crazy world that we live in with NIL. And I want to, let's start with how we kind of got to this point of where we're at right now, where it seems like a lot of coaches are now zeroing in on inducements to go play at schools. And different than when different than like last year, Pete, where these players would get deals with local companies and whatnot, maybe some bigger companies, but just kind of summarize, in your opinion, how we've gotten to this point where it was kind of a small cookie cutter type deal last season. Now we've gotten to a point where there's some big money being laid out there.
When you don't have uniform legislation and you don't have enforcement, it means people get the impression that you can do whatever the heck you want to do. And that's what we're seeing in the NIL space. We desperately need uniform rules, but not only uniform rules, we desperately need to know that there's an enforcement mechanism out there which can at least scare some folks into realizing you can't just do what you want and you can't put your universities at risk, because that's what's happening. I want to flash back though.
Yeah.
The last time you had me on, we actually spoke about a University of Miami team deal with Top Team America and
Yep.
Dan Lambert. And I don't know if you remember this, and I'm not right about many things, but I said, it's not that the deal's egregious that every player was getting 50 grand a year. It was that every booster in the country was now looking at what happened at Miami and said, oh, that's what I can do. And that is what we've seen. We've seen boosters now come out and say, I'm going to one up you. The next one says, I'm going to one up you. Boosters think, especially at schools that are trying to get back to national prominence, that this is a way to induce athletes. This is a way to even the playing field. But unfortunately, they are doing it in a very risky and scary way as it pertains to universities. And I will say, just because we haven't seen enforcement and punishment yet does not mean it's not coming, because we have 3 rules. We have no inducement, no pay for play, and quid pro quo. And I promise you those rules are being broken left and right.
All right, let's go back to that. By the way, you did say that about Dan Lambert and American Top Team. I remember that. Folks might not remember that, but I remember that. And it all started with like $500 payments to players all on the team, whatnot. And that's how we've gotten to the point where it got bigger and badder, is the best way to put it. So let's get to this part. How do we handle when it comes to, let me rephrase it. How do you look at it when it comes to inducements and these players that are now getting so-called paid before they step foot on campus? Because we're going to have a real conversation here. Let's not be dumb. There is some crazy stuff going on right now in the NIL world that would make the stuff that's gone on in the past 30 years look like small potatoes.
Yeah,
How do we get to that point?
it's getting out of hand. And the reason we got to that point is, again, when you see people do stuff that doesn't look right or doesn't come across right and nobody's doing a thing to stop it, it's just going to be, well, let's see how far we can push the envelope. When you have the Wild West, you're going to have wild actors. And nothing signifies that more than college sports, where people are desperate to win, especially fans, where we want to desperately be a part of it. Listen, boosters for decades and maybe even a century have been trying to influence athletes and individuals to go to a school so they feel like they had an impact on their university and help them win. Okay. It's just right now you have no enforcement, but you also don't have a set industry. And what I mean by that is you don't have any experts in the space. I appreciate you saying I'm an NIL expert. I just don't think anyone can be. And so we have a lot of lawyers coming into the space trying to make their name off of NIL, and they're giving really bad advice, like leaking contracts. Student athletes, prospective student athletes, should not be and are not permitted to sign NIL deals before stepping on campus. But unfortunately, it's starting to happen. And there's definitely ways to limit the risk. If I'm a collective, okay, and let's say I'm at the University of Tennessee and I'm approached by a recruit, I'm not allowed to say that if you come to this school, you're going to get these deals. Good luck proving that if that happens, right? So if you are going to have those conversations, and I'm not saying to have them because they are illegal, nothing can be more than a 1-year deal, in my opinion. And for the boosters that are worried, well, what happens if an athlete wants a 4-year deal because they don't trust us? Tell them they have to, because if I promise you 4 years, but our contract's 1 year at a time, and I don't renew and pay you the second, third, and fourth year, you're going to tell every recruit in the country we're not getting kids anyways. The student athletes have the power. Tell them that. But tell me this difference, and let's do it in a way. Let's just go this route.
Yeah.
I'm giving you $1 million to come play at the University of Tennessee versus I have $1 million deal for you that's contingent on doing 10 appearances in the city of Knoxville. Is it an inducement if that athlete goes to Tuscaloosa and can't get to Knoxville to fulfill their contractual duty, and therefore the athlete breaches the contract? To me, that's not an inducement, because if somehow that athlete wants to find a way to get back and forth to Knoxville 10 times a year, we'll pay him out.
That's a good way to put it. So you're pretty much saying if a kid agreed to something with a university, let's just say Tennessee, whatever, since I'm right here in Knoxville, but then ends up going to Alabama, but he still has a deal in place, then he can go. If they're going to hold him to that contract, not let him out, you got to go back and forth. Because you got to fulfill that contract, right?
Because if you're the collective and I sign a kid, right, to come do deals in Knoxville or come to Tennessee, and they don't come to Tennessee, and I cancel that contract, you have no legal argument for why that wasn't an inducement.
Without getting yourself in trouble trying to present the argument. If
the entire contract is contingent on you coming to Tennessee, that is an inducement. I'm sorry. So you have to structure in a way where it's not contingent on you actually being enrolled in that school.
Okay, I'll throw something else at you then. How are these players right now? And we kind of got a figure on this and how things somewhat play out, but I want the public to kind of hear it. In your opinion, how are these players setting a market for their value right now? Like a wide receiver compared to a quarterback, or an offensive lineman compared to a defensive lineman. There's figures out there from $2 million to the old $8 million contract deal, whatever you want to call it, that was signed. How are we figuring out a market value for a kid that hasn't stepped foot on campus and that still has another year of high school ball left?
I mean, that's the weirdness of this space. I don't think there is a set market. I
Right?
think it's going to take 24 to 48 months to figure out. And I think the biggest boon is going to be with these kids right now. Everyone wants to play with the new toy, right? NIL is the new toy.
Yeah.
I think there might even be a leveling out where certain people aren't willing to give $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year to NIL. I think that can wear out. And I think some of the bigger contracts, and let's call them what they are, contracts to go to certain schools, might be the biggest. We see them early on. No, I think quarterbacks will always have a different market.
Yeah.
But I think we need to see how kids pan out, how the transfer market plays. You get enough kids that you pay big money to that don't pan out, and you might see some of those deals shrink.
I mean, the crazy part about it is, Pete, what if you got let's just say a kid comes on campus and he's a 5-star quarterback. He signed for a tremendous amount of money, but the coaching staff has another quarterback right now on campus that maybe they feel like, okay, this kid might actually be the real deal. Like, he didn't come in on some crazy NIL deal, but he might be the real deal. We got to stick with him. What are you going to do? You're going to stick the $1 million quarterback on the sideline and say, hey, you can't play? Like, there's a lot of different weird factors that go into this.
You're bringing up something that's not being talked about, which is, does NIL create more of a power struggle between boosters who want to be owners and athletic departments? We've already had that for years, right? If your athletic department's not doing what boosters like, they pull some money. But now, I mean, just follow Twitter, follow some of these boosters that are getting involved in NIL, and they are vocal. They come across as, I'm a team owner. It's only going to get worse and worse if we don't legislate this field. This is getting weird, man. And I don't see it slowing down until someone gets smacked by an enforcement mechanism.
How do you enforce it though? Okay, so let's just talk this through though. How how are you going to enforce it besides? Okay, so here's the thing. In other states have done this. Alabama just passed this law. Tennessee did it too, where the collectives and the groups around the universities and whatnot can be in touch now with the
Well,
coaches,
let's
players, whatnot.
yeah, let's start on state laws. They don't mean shit. Excuse my
Right.
language.
No, you're good.
No, listen, if I have a Tennessee bill, it means the only person I can punish are Tennessee actors and Tennessee schools. There's no incentive to do that. You're gonna only put your school at a negative starting spot. And by the way, if you smack, University of Tennessee, or you smack a booster with a penalty, I bet you have a lot of lobbyists and you have a lot of influential people who donate to your political campaigns that are Tennessee fans. That's not going to go over well with. So let's just be honest about that.
Yeah.
I think the NCAA is monitoring the space and they're waiting for something very egregious to make its way into the space. And I think a few of them have happened. They're reviewing it and they're saying, all right, if we hit a school with lack of institutional control for turning a blind eye, or not doing the right thing when they learn about this, and we hit them with financial ramifications, so long as we know we can't lose in court, let's go do it.
But my question is now, since they passed the laws in the state, does that open up now the
No,
opportunity for the NCAA to come in and say, you know about this now? Like there
no,
is a lack of
no.
control. Like, does it
So
play out that way?
no, because if I'm the NCAA, I said, look, you have your state bills, fine. But we gave all of you schools 3 rules: no
Yeah.
pay for play, no quid pro quo, and no inducement. If you actively know about an inducement and you turn a blind eye and we see it, we're hitting you with lack of institutional control. You are required as a university to maintain and monitor your boosters. Now, that's impossible to 100% extent, but you can't
Right.
just turn a blind eye. And that's where things are going to get tricky. And that's where schools are freaking out because they know their boosters are getting crazy. And how do we rein them in?
Have you, when we look at this right now and we try to figure out, okay, how are these playing out when it comes to deals and contract with boosters? Like we saw that thing the other day, and I'm sorry I don't remember his name, but he's a Miami booster, and he put on
John
Twitter.
Ruiz.
Yeah, there you go, and he puts on Twitter that kid agrees to $800,000 over 2 years, 400 grand a year in a car. Like, bro, we're getting to a point where they're gloating about this. You would have to think the school's like, what the hell are you doing? Why are you talking about this so much?
Yeah. And I think that's the issue. And I think you had your own little issue at Tennessee with the leaking of the contract of the Athletic. It
I
used
don't
to
know what you're
be,
talking about.
it used to be, if you're going to be a bad actor or you're going to be a little wild, do it in the shadows.
Yeah.
NIL has made it a way where, like, I'm going to be the
No,
supervillain, right?
no
Like
more bagmen.
it's crazy to me. Now, if you look at that actual tweet by John Ruiz, he's insinuating potential inducement if you read the tea leaves, but he didn't say anything that's inducement. He's saying this athlete signed, he is committed to Miami. And remember, it wasn't a high school recruit, it was a portal kid. So this kid's a college athlete. He has committed. All right. And for committing, now that he's with Miami, we're going to give him a life wallet deal. I thought he was very calculated in the way he worded it, where on its face, the tweet itself is not an inducement. But what actually happened? Were there communications beforehand? Was he promised a deal if he enrolled in Miami? We all know. But why tweet it? Why tweet it? And I will say, based on some of my conversations with university people and what's going on in Miami, I don't know what's happened in the last few months, but early on, I do know that the time is now, and John Ruiz did a great job of reaching out to the university. And before, doing anything or paying an athlete, they did get approval from compliance. I don't know if that's still the case. I don't want to speak on things I don't know about.
Yeah.
But that tweet was definitely interesting. There was another tweet by him where he spoke about an athlete being offered a deal to join Life Wallet who is from Nicaragua. I mean, now we're getting into immigration issues and, F1 F1 visa requirements.
Yep.
We have a lot of people doing a lot of work in this space that don't know all the rules, and that's my fear.
How scared? Okay, so I've talked to a couple different coaches around the Southeastern Conference recently about this in the last 3 weeks, and a couple of them seem a little timid about what's going on. and a couple of them in the basketball realm of things. How much do you think coaches are kind of freaking out right now because they don't want to go all in on this NIL stuff, and they don't want to go all in on, okay, this guy's going to get 250 grand while I got some players on my roster. Like, let's just use basketball, for example, that I've got like some players on my roster that aren't really making much of anything, maybe, 70, 80, but you got some new kid coming in making 250, 300, something like that. How, how timid do you think some of these coaches are to pull the trigger when it comes to some of these deals?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. If I'm a school, I'm involved in NIL, but I'm not being the most egregious and jumping all the way in the deep end. I think there's a happy medium, a proper medium, and you don't want to be the first one that gets smacked down. And I think coaches are struggling because change is upon us, and nobody likes change when things are working well. Then let's be honest, things have been going great for Division I basketball and football coaches. They get hefty salaries. I thought Ross Dellinger wrote a great article on the state of college football coaches. We've been hearing those rumblings forever. But you already had no life, 364, 24/7, 365, 24/7. And now throw in the transfer portal and NIL. I mean, you hear coaches actually say, I'd rather recruit in the portal than recruit high school kids, because I could spend 2 or 3 years recruiting a high school athlete who leaves after 1 year. If I recruit a kid in a portal, for a couple months, they're stuck with me because you only get one transfer. So where's the time worth spending? The space is wacky. College sports is wacky. The ones that play it safe, know the rules, engage, but don't go too far and accept change are the ones that are going to win, in my opinion.
Pete, I know coaches that have gotten out of the college game in the last year because they did not want to deal with this. They did not want to deal with, okay, first off, I have to recruit this high school kid, okay, this 17-year-old kid, 16-year-old kid, whatever. But then also, by the way, we're not doing things like we were doing them before, which is behind the shadows. We're doing it out in public. So now they're having to ask questions and answer questions on how much money am I going to make there? What did this person make last year? You know, it we'll just cut straight to it. For stuff that all went down behind the scenes over the last 30 some odd years, and for it to be out in the open now, it is freaking some of these assistant coaches out. And it's also driving them crazy enough where they're getting out of the college game and going to the NFL to deal with professionals, Pete.
I don't even think I need to answer it. I think it's
But isn't it
straightforward.
crazy?
It is, but it isn't. Listen, if the NCAA was smart, they'd right now say, listen, we don't have to go to a full employment model, but let's go collectively bargain with athletes and let's try to figure out the space with them. The best way for the NCAA to stay in power and do what they want is to go negotiate with a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds who have some representation. If you think NFL owners get things over NFL players where it's a billionaire versus millionaire market, imagine what university presidents and athletic directors are going to do to college athletes. So the biggest issue with the NCAA is they're too reactionary rather than getting ahead of this thing. Let athletes and their representatives get at the table, put some rules that make sense for everyone, and let's legislate the space. Let's get actual rules for NIL. Let's get actual enforcement for NIL. Let's get actual rules and schedules for the transfer portal and recruiting. Let's get this to a place where everyone wants to be here and where everyone knows what's going on and where everyone understands the consequences. Until we do that, get ready for this to be the Wild West and for people ready to pull their hair out.
You deal with a lot of colleges with your company, Athliance, which is fantastic, by the way. And I was watching it from the start and where it's at now. It's just grown tremendously in the colleges that you deal with. And you talk to these administrators a lot. What is the concern right now besides getting in trouble for inducements? Like what is the factors that, okay, we need to overstaff on some of these things, or we need to bring in a company like you
Yeah.
to be able to handle these transactions, but also how they're going down? What has those conversations been like for you?
Yeah. What we do basically at Athliance is we have a software. So when athletes get deals, they can disclose the deals in our software so schools know about it. We also do a lot of education on life skills, like what's a credit score, what's a 401k, what to look for when leasing a car,
Taxes.
taxes, what's a 1099, right? It's crazy out here. The schools look at us to a certain extent like we're a CYA, right? Like if something goes down, hey, listen, we did not turn a blind eye. We did everything we could for athletes to tell us what's going on. We can only lead a horse to water, right? We can't force them to drink. Now, the dirty secret of the space for many reasons is student athletes aren't disclosing their deals.
Right.
So what we've done is we've created a side software that basically connects with collectives, marketplaces, and opportunity bringers where we can automatically disclose deals for free for them to schools, whether or not it's an Athliance school. So, Spires or Spry, however you say it.
Spire. Yeah.
Spire, give me a call. Let me do all of your disclosures so you're being compliant at Tennessee and get them off your back, right? Because if you have a software like ours and they're bringing you auto disclosures and your collective is hooked up to them and marketplaces are hooked up to them and athletes are disclosing deals, the more you know, the more you can protect yourself. And at the very least, at least you have a CYA as an insurance policy. So you can actually step up and kind of speak to the NCAA if they come knocking on your door. We're the only software company in the space that has an actual investigative and audit support trail to actually protect you if there is an investigation. So, one of the reasons why schools feel comfortable when they're with us and they're handling the space a little better is they know they at least have that insurance policy in place. And it's not just like we have a disclosure form through our software, like some of these other competitors we have.
We've talked about this privately between me and you, and I don't think it's a big deal to bring it out publicly when it comes to taxes and what these kids forget to do. How big a deal was it, in your opinion, last year when all this stuff started flowing in, and even right now, where you get these kids that they get these deals and they sign off on, and maybe they don't have the best representation from a group like Spire or just whatever, somebody like that, the new Alabama collective. But they don't have those deals in place. They don't have somebody, that can go take care of that stuff. And now they're caught with a shitload of taxes that they have to pay. What has that been like?
A nightmare. I know of a certain athlete who I'm close with, that from July 1st to December 31st did about $50,000 in NIL deals and thought he didn't have to pay taxes if the deal was under 10,000. So he structured a bunch of 9,999 deals. Had no idea what a 1099 was. Met with his accountant about a month ago, and the accountant was like, based on write-offs and this, you owe $12,000, and he didn't save a penny. Didn't save a penny. So now he owes the government that, and he has to pay, a monthly lien.
Installments. Yeah,
it's crazy. That is the space right now. There are many of those stories. They're not going to go public because no one's going to admit it. These student athletes had no idea what a 1099 was. They thought people were either withholding the taxes for them or they didn't have to pay taxes. They all got bad advice. The biggest athlete problem is taxes. I don't think the NCAA is going to go after any individual athletes. In fact, I think they should stay away while we figure out this space. Don't be the typical NCAA and punish the kids that are the ones that are getting misled and taken advantage of. Go after the adults in the room, which are the schools that should be doing a better job of maintaining relationships with their boosters and knowing what's going on. But yeah, we're seeing athletes give up too many of their rights, not knowing about taxes. This has just become another way to take advantage of athletes, specifically football and basketball, where many of these kids come from low-income areas and low-income families and have never been involved in the business world. Now, the positive to that is I'd rather student athletes make mistakes, for the ones that are going pro at least, right? Which unfortunately is a much smaller amount. But I'd rather these athletes make mistakes with $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $100,000 than when they get to the pros and they get their first $20 million contract, right? There's weirdly a benefit to that. But again, we're talking about the 1% rather than the 99%. And we need to find a model that protects as close to 100% as possible.
I'm going to throw one at you here, and I don't know how you're going to take this. So I'm just going to put it out there. Why in the world, if you are an agent, if you are a collective, if you are anybody that's handling deals for these high school players, Pete, why in the world are you, I don't want to call it showboating, but I guess it's self-promotion of, hey, look what I'm doing with these players. Look at these contracts that I have right now. Why even let that be known that there's stuff like that out there? If we're trying to keep NIL somewhat on the down low, okay, yep, and these players want to keep this stuff to themselves and they don't want to have to put it out there and whatnot, Why you got some lawyers and agents out there trying to,
Well, look at who's doing it, Trey.
well, I know.
The established agents and the established lawyers, they're not promoting it. It's these
Exactly.
guys that are trying to make a name, which is another way of using athletes. Listen, the NFLPA, the NBAPA, the MLBPA, all the PAs missed a huge opportunity to regulate their own in this space as it pertains to agents. And they let it become the Wild West with that too. So you have a lot of people that had no way of breaking into the space that are schleps or dirty actors that are using NIL as a way to promote themselves on the backs of athletes. That's been happening for hundreds of years. It's just a different way that we're doing it now, and it's a shame.
Hey, last
You don't
question
see
for you, Pete.
CAA and WME doing that shit.
Well, no, and I get that part of it, and I understand that, but it's just the way it is. Pete, last question for you. Do you see any changes coming with the NCAA in the next, let's just say, 6 months to a year?
Gut says yes. My rational self says I don't know. But I think there's been such egregious violations that I think we're gonna get a notice of allegations coming here soon from someone.
Pete, tell everybody where they can follow you about your company, what they can follow you on Twitter, and man, just you're a fantastic dude. You explain it so well, and I appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you. You can find the company at Athliance, ATHLIANCE, like Athliance meets compliance, .co, not .com, or contact me on Twitter at NILPete, PETE.
Yep, and I'll be throwing out the links in the article, so you guys pay attention to that. This was another sit down with Trey Wallace. Thank you to Pete Schoenthal from Athliance for joining. We'll talk to you next time.